Hello and welcome back to the Unafraid podcast. This is a new format of episode. Today I will be giving my personal testimony. I'd just like to start out with a disclaimer. This is my personal testimony. I've marked this episode as explicit because it is such a volatile subject. I realize that this is something that if you are an adult, you may not be ready to discuss this with your child, or maybe you just haven't. If a child is listening to this, I would encourage you to take any questions to a trusted adult. I'm not going to drag this out. I would ask that you would share it and continue to support the podcast. Thank you for supporting it as much as you have already. Please be sure to check out the Linktree link below for all the socials and everything else. If you find one of my business cards laying out and about, please be sure to pass it along. Without further ado, I'm going to just jump into it. This is going to be a longer episode, and I assume that any other testimony episodes will also be a longer episode. So this is a difficult one. I used to have no issues telling my testimony. I used to freely tell anyone who would ask. However, I can't remember the last time that I told my testimony. There have been opportunities, and I've made the choice in those moments not to. I think that it is because it has become such a volatile subject. Not that it wasn't always a volatile subject to a degree. But in the last few years, especially today, and seemingly more so all of the time, it has become more and more volatile of a subject. As I was preparing this episode, I had to pray a lot as anxiety started creeping in, as I felt that spirit of fear beginning to fill me up. I did tell you that that was the enemy's favorite weapon to use against me, right? As God was guiding me through creating this podcast and the episodes that I recorded before I knew whether it was just a test of obedience or an actual intention to launch the podcast, I knew that this would be an episode at some point. Partly this is my fault because I have asked God to give me opportunities and boldness to begin sharing my testimony once again. I knew, though. It was something deep in me that knew, but I honestly didn't know that I would be doing it so soon. However, in the days leading up to me preparing this episode, I have felt God pressing down on me more and more to prepare it. I feel God's reassurance, but I must confess I can also hear the lies being whispered into my ears. The problem is that every good lie has a bit of truth, right? The things that the enemy is whispering to me aren't really lies, as much as they are twisted versions of the truth. He is bringing to my mind the things that are probably going to take place when I post this, and even things that might not, but still could happen. Things that I shouldn't concern myself with because I serve a God who is going to take care of me. He is going to be with me, whatever may come. He goes before me and comes behind me. I can go forth with courage and boldness because the Lord is with me wherever I go. I'm still nervous, though. Maybe that isn't such a bad thing. There is humility in telling this testimony. There is complete reliance on God and leaning into Him. I know there are going to be angry people who are going to say hateful things. Like it or not, though, this is my testimony. This is what the Lord brought me out of. This is the place that He met me and brought me out of. This is going to be the most in-depth version of my testimony I've told. So even if you know my testimony, even if you were around to watch it play out, there are still some things that you probably don't know. My first crush on a girl was in my kindergarten class. I remember the child lens I saw her through. I remember the butterflies in my little 5 or 6-year-old tummy. I remember my heartbreak when she stopped going to the same school. I didn't know that was a crush then because, again, I was 5 or 6 years old. This is going to be hard for some people to accept. In fact, I would venture to say that the people who are believers may have a more difficult time with this than some of the LGBT community. As a former lesbian, and as a Christian who loves Jesus wholeheartedly, I want to say up front that I do not honestly believe that everyone who is LGBT chooses the lifestyle. They didn't choose to be attracted to the same sex. They don't choose to feel out of place in their bodies, but the problem is that we are born into sin. Don't get me wrong, for some people it is a choice. Some people choose to go down that path because of trauma or past hurts or some other reason, but for some, and I would argue to say maybe even most actual LGBT people, didn't choose to be that way. People, hear me out. I didn't choose to have a crush on a girl in kindergarten. As I got older, I didn't choose to be attracted to the girls I was attracted to. I tried to reason it away in my mind and was honestly in denial for a very long while. I reasoned that I wasn't a lesbian or bisexual just because I happened to be attracted to girls. I was totally into guys. Anything else just isn't normal. As time went on, it became harder and harder for me to push away the idea that I could be a lesbian. When I started realizing that I'd rather be with girls than any guy, and that I had had multiple interactions with girls that were flirtatious or romantic in nature, even though I would try to tell myself repeatedly that it was harmless because I wasn't gay, I couldn't be gay, I finally, with great dread, and that is an important thing to remember, came to the realization that I liked girls. I cried. I panicked. Let's take a pause, because at this point there may be some that would attribute this to me having had strict or overly religious parents who made me fearful. I did not, and I honestly don't remember ever hearing anything negative spoken about homosexuality in our household growing up. In fact, my mom knew and worked with people who were completely open about being gay, and when she spoke of them, I don't recall it ever being anything but friendly. She never cared too much if they were or weren't. That was their business. I say that so you can't blame my reaction to coming to terms with my attractions on any part of my upbringing. There was just something in me that knew it was unnatural and wrong for me to like girls. This panic remained for quite some time, years even. I remember crying nightly, sobbing uncontrollably, begging a God that I didn't yet really believe in to fix me. Either make the attractions go away or let me wake up a guy so that it's okay. Just don't let me be gay. This was a common thing. When I finally started coming to terms and coming out of denial, not completely, but somewhat, I tried to identify myself as bisexual because that was at least better than being fully gay, right? I was peeking out of the closet, but still not quite ready to jump out. There were passing attractions and passing flings, I guess, but nothing too serious, and I still tried to date guys. Is everyone still with me? I'm probably upsetting people all the way around, but if my testimony can speak to one person, so be it. I'm not going to go into every crush or fling I had with a girl, but I will talk about the one that was the most significant. There was a girl. This girl and I were friends. Over time, we became really good friends. I remember I developed feelings for her early on. Though being me, I tried to shove those down super fast. I liked her, though. We hung out quite a bit and talked on the phone all of the time. It didn't take long for it to become difficult to keep shoving those feelings down. I didn't tell her that I liked girls. In fact, I never really told people that at all until much later. This girl, the friend that I had feelings for, we'll call her Jane, went to church. That tidbit of information is important. One evening, we were sitting next to each other, and I told her that I was struggling because I had feelings for someone. She wanted to know who, but I wouldn't tell her for the longest. I didn't know how she would react. I fully expected it to be unreciprocated. I wasn't expecting her to have feelings toward me, but there was a part of me that wanted so badly for her to know, just on the small breath of a chance, she would be willing to give it a chance. Jumping ahead a bit, I eventually did tell her. My memory of this part is a little fuzzy, but I believe she uttered something to the effect of, "Oh." And then I believe we were pretty quiet after that. My heart hurt. I don't remember how many days passed after that, but I do remember the next time I saw her and she came up to speak to me. I stared at the floor and wouldn't look at her. This wasn't out of how I felt. It was out of respect because, to be frank, we were in a room where girls were changing, and therefore I was staring at the floor pretty much the whole time unless I was sure I could look only at someone who was decent. I exchanged very few words with her. I don't remember what they were, but I could tell she seemed upset. I would later find out that she thought I didn't want to look at her for other reasons and that it had upset her greatly. I explained why I didn't look at her and she understood. We continued our friendship, but we didn't talk about it much. She would try to get me to go to church events. She would try to convince me that I needed to let go of those feelings and turn to Jesus. There were lengthy conversations about how I couldn't be gay and go to heaven. She really tried her hardest to save me, so to speak. The thing was, and something I don't think most people relate to in stories like this, I knew I was bound for hell. No, I didn't go to church. No, I didn't know Jesus. No, I wasn't religious or anything like that, but something in me knew that I was going to hell. Remember, there were years of my life that I cried out to a guy that I didn't yet believe in to fix me so that I wouldn't be a lesbian. Sobbing, broken, begging. It took so long for me to come to terms with it, and I thought I was happy. I felt happier accepting who I was, not fighting it. But with that came also accepting my fate. It may seem odd to some that I felt that way with no significant or impactful exposure to God, the Bible, or church. However, I would later look back at moments that God had tried to break through to me. For now, though, I remember joking with friends that I was on a slide to hell. I had accepted this. To embrace my attraction to girls was to embrace an eternity in hell. Funny, I believed in heaven and hell, I guess, but I didn't know why. I just did. So let's go with the highlights for this portion. Over a couple of years, I think, there were lots of fights between Jane and I. We would be the best of friends and then not speak for a week. One day, she told me that if I brought up my feelings for her again, she would walk away from our friendship, and this time, it would be for good. So I locked it away. This kept things friendly between us, but kept some deeply rooted heartache in me. There were these moments that showed me she had started to consider it. One was an outright display of questioning, and the other was this almost moment that I think caught us both off guard. You may be wondering why I feel the need to go into such detail about this. It's because I need you, listener, to understand just how not a fluke this was. I need you to understand how much I fought against my attractions. I need you to understand my lack of knowing God at that point in my life. I need you to understand that this wasn't something that came about because of the influence of others, nor because I just wanted to give it a try, but because I authentically was attracted to girls literally from as far back in my life as I can remember. I want you to know and understand the pain, the depth, and the absolute soul-deep imprint of truth that God had placed in me in order for me to eventually get where I am now. To people who have known me my whole life, when you started to figure out that I was gay, you wondered what caused it. The answer isn't something that you want to hear, but the truth of the matter is, it started when I was born. As I said previously, we're all born into sin. Back to the highlights, though. I finally at some point came to a place of acceptance where it didn't hurt so bad. I'd put those feelings in a box, finally closed it, finally locked it, and finally decided to look around at other girls. So there was a new girl about this time at our school. We'll call her Christine. I thought she was pretty. I asked about her and proceeded to try and get to know her a little better. Obviously, she was new, so I didn't immediately know whether or not she liked girls or not. We hung out around school a bit, got to be friends, and I learned that she liked both guys and girls. Then began the flirting. It was very slight at first and then became more of a serious thing. She was the first girl that I was able to really like since Jane. The flirting became very mutual and we started talking about dating. Very early on into us discussing the possibility of us starting to date, an interesting conversation happened with Jane. We spoke a lot on the phone. We were good friends even with everything that we had been through with how I felt. She was one of my closest friends. She had been telling me about this person that she was really starting to like. We'd reached a point where we could have conversations about people we liked without it being awkward, though admittedly there was always a pang of jealousy and a little heartache for me, but nothing I couldn't handle. When she came clean about it being a girl, I was hurt. Yes, I was talking to Christine, but I had been pursuing Jane for years. She was the person I truly loved and wanted to be with. I know that sounds unfair to Christine, and I guess it probably was, but it would have been that way with any other girl that wasn't Jane. So one night, we were on the phone, talking about Christine and I, and the possibility of us getting together, and I noted that she sounded a little disappointed about this, but I just figured maybe she didn't think Christine was my type, or didn't feel like she was the best match for me. It's important to also note that by this point, Jane had stopped trying to save me from homosexuality, so to speak. She had apologized and told me that I should be able to be with who I wanted to be with, if that's who I was. This is something that I quite frankly feel guilty about even now. I do try to lay it down, but as far as I know, the last time we spoke, she was still well removed from church and Christianity, and there will always be a part of me that blames myself for that. She's a big girl, she makes her own decisions, and I know she's doing well for herself in life now, but the only thing that matters most in life is something that she let go of when we were young, and I always felt like that was my fault. So as we were talking, I turned the conversation on to her and wanted her to tell me about this girl. So who is she? I'd asked. She's someone in band. Ouch, that hurt worse. I was in band. I began, of course, thinking, what is so great about this other girl that she liked her but wasn't willing to give me a chance? I didn't ask. That would be bringing up my feelings again. Oh, I said. Yeah, she said. This began a game of process of elimination, continuously skipping over myself, of course, and being very adamant that, yes, I'm sure that is all the girls in band. Then it hit me, and this was a back-and-forth conversation for a few days because she did confirm that it was me. I didn't know how to react to it. I didn't want to react in any specific way because I remember thinking, what if this is just her testing to see if I still like her, because I am such a paranoid person. Day 2 of knowing this, I told her how I felt because she was wanting to know where I was at. I was honest. I didn't want to lose her as a friend. I was honest about that. She gave me an opportunity to be completely honest and let me know that it wasn't going to affect our friendship one way or another. So I told her yes, I still felt the same. Nothing had changed. I just had it in a box, and I was willing to keep it there for the sake of our friendship if this is what that was about. She told me that she had started having feelings for me and wasn't sure how I would react because of the crap she had put me through beforehand. She also knew that I was talking to Christine and didn't want to interfere with that. I made it clear to her that she was the person I wanted to be with more than anything, and she told me that she wanted me to take 3 days and think about it. I took this time to talk things out with Christine. She understood completely and told me I should go for it. Christine and I were never something that was going to be long-term. We were just wanting to date each other for a bit. Neither of us were heartbroken, least of all me. I called Jane. After a long, in-depth conversation, we agreed to start dating. I was happier than I had ever been before without question. I had been head over heels for her for at least 2.5 years, and finally, I was getting a shot to be with the person I cared about most. Everyone still with me? I understand that this might be hard to listen to for some of you, so if you have made it this far, it's okay to stop listening. I know there are details of this part of my life that some of you really don't want to know, and that's understandable and okay. I know you know that it all turns out good. Jane and I were together and over the moon at the end of summer and into our new school year. We were open about it with just a few people. It wasn't long, though, before the school knew. That wasn't that big of a deal to me because it was just the school. Now, as a disclaimer, any kids listening to this, younger or older, skipping school is wrong. Don't do it. With that being said, I skipped school a good handful of times, at least with Jane. We snuck around for dates, saying that we were with other friends and then just meeting with each other for dinners, fairs, or whatever. Sometimes, in a moment of a guilty conscience, I think, Jane would insist on the friend that was our cover tagging along for the sake of honesty. In the last few months of our relationship, an opportunity arose. Again, kids, this is not an example for you if you choose to listen to this. Make better choices than me. So an opportunity arose that gave us the house all to ourselves. That didn't go quite as planned, but it still ended with us spending the night together alone, and then going to school the next day. This was the beginning of the end. That morning we got up early in order to leave the house before the sun was up, because we weren't supposed to be there, obviously. We decided that we would go and get breakfast. So we went a town over about 20 minutes away to go and eat Waffle House. We were tired, slightly sleep deprived, and both not feeling all too good. After breakfast, we went to the nearest Walmart. You know, when they were still 24 hours and you could do that. I don't remember why we were there, but I remember that afterwards we both took a nap in the car in the parking lot. At some point, we woke up, and I drove us back to our town for school. We were still too early, so we both ended up falling asleep again in the car. The vice principal came and knocked on the window to wake us up. That was lovely, and we went inside to sit in the gym and wait for the start of school. We were continuing to feel worse and worse as the morning drug on. I would like to take a second to explain something important here. Throughout the school year, I had been having a lot of trouble with my heart racing, being tired all the time, some shortness of breath, and just generally struggling through each day. At one point, I had to wear a heart monitor because we weren't sure what was going on. Spoilers, it didn't give us any more insight. I was falling asleep a lot during class and crashing when I would go home, but we were figuring that I was just worn out from band. Now it was all finally coming to a head. I was more tired than I had been all year. I felt nauseated. I was miserable. I called my mother and asked if I could come home. She told me I had to stay, but brought me some medicine to get through the day. I couldn't be entirely sure, but something told me when I saw her at the school that day, she knew. She knew everything, or at least pretty much everything. Things deteriorated pretty rapidly after that. The timeline gets a bit fuzzy here, but I'll try to keep it in order as best I can. That evening, my mom picked me up from school instead of me riding the bus as I normally did. She asked for my phone, took it, and put it in the door next to her. I was grounded. They knew about the spend the night. They knew about Jane. They knew I was gay. They knew everything. I don't remember if I was able to return to school any days after that or not. I remember that it was either that evening or a few evenings later. I was feeling really bad. Mom took me to the after hours. I was freezing and had layers on. I didn't have a fever when we left, but I did by the time they took us back and felt significantly worse by the time the doctor came into the room. I don't remember what the doctor said, but they were wrong. In fact, 3 or 4 doctors we would talk to would all be wrong. I was out of school, weak, tired, and miserable. Ulcers started to consume the inside of my mouth and down my throat. I began to look yellowish, which at first I honestly thought was just me, only later to find out that it was because my spleen was enlarged, inflamed, enlarged, something like that. The ulcers in my mouth covered every inch and made it impossible to eat or drink anything. Even water felt like acid going down. While I feel like it was longer looking back, and honestly it probably felt longer, this only went on for 1 or 2 weeks, I think. Different doctors gave different answers. We even went to see a dentist because I was in such horrible, horrible pain from the sores in my mouth. I don't remember the last person we finally went to see, but I know that finally someone got it right. I was diagnosed with mono. It had apparently been dormant in my body for quite a while, and it just finally exploded. It was what had caused all of the tiredness, shortness of breath, and racing heart throughout the year. They sent me for a blood draw, and no more than what they took made me pass out. They had to put a pneumonia cap under my nose to bring me to. That I remember very clearly. It's not something you easily forget. To this day, that is the worst thing I have ever smelled. I was so weak and so tired. They prescribed a strong liquid pain medicine for me to be able to take so that I could finally eat something. The doctor told my parents that had I not come in that day, I wouldn't have likely made it through the night. A lot gets really fuzzy through this part, so please bear with me. I remained in contact with Jane through the iPod Touch I had. We were able to continue texting and talking on FaceTime, often, but with discretion. There were all-night FaceTime calls, and before long we started getting a bit reckless. We would fall asleep talking to each other on FaceTime, and I would almost get caught when I would oversleep. At some point during this disastrous time, I started praying again. I still don't know if I was believing in God yet or not, but I was sitting with a counselor about once a week so that I could basically tell him that the Bible didn't make sense because fill in the blank. I would come up with questions, and he would calmly and patiently answer them, and in doing so, squash my argument. Over time, this became a less defensive interaction, and curiosity started forming. I was getting answers to things and no longer just trying to prove the Bible wrong. Because I was coming up with questions every week, I started kind of surface studying the Bible a bit, and then would sit down and give my long list of questions. We'd talk it out. I'm pretty sure by now we had started going to church. As I was saying, though, I had started to pray again. A very simple, I don't know how I feel or how to do this, but God, if you're listening, kind of prayer. When I went through having mono, I was kind of bound to the downstairs area of our house for a while. I was just too weak, and it was easier to keep me downstairs for the duration of this. I wasn't comfortable with the whole Christian or praying thing quite yet, so when I wanted to pray, I would go into the downstairs bathroom, sit at the edge of the bathtub, and use it like an altar. Crying out to God, crying in general, praying for my relationship with Jane. Yes, I know how ironic that is, but some of my first prayers were in regards to her. Her well-being, the questions she was probably getting bombarded with at school, the hurt she was probably experiencing. My parents, somehow or another, found out about my texting her through the iPod, and they took it. She kept sending texts, but I was unable to respond, so I prayed about that. Praying that God would let her know that it wasn't me ignoring her. I didn't want her to think that I just didn't care anymore, because I did. We had plans for our future, and I intended to keep them. I was a junior in high school at this point. We were about halfway through the year, and I had missed a lot of school. I was still getting work sent home and doing that, but I was probably still quite behind in my studies. Not that I was the best student to begin with, don't get me wrong. My high school grades were nothing to brag about. In fact, I even surprised myself and former teachers when I started making straight A's in college. That, however, on top of getting busted with the iPod, was plenty of motive. My parents withdrew me from public school and put me in homeschool. At this point, I was given my laptop back after it had been extremely locked down. The only websites that would load were from my homeschool sites. That wouldn't last very long because at 17 years old, I was apparently a tech guru. I had a flash drive that I used to get an unlocked web browser onto my computer and then used the browser to download something like FaceTime and other things so that I could get in touch with Jane. We started talking very regularly and emailing a lot once more. Any chance we got to video chat, we did so. Stress came into our relationship, though. We weren't able to see each other in person or hang out at all, and she was getting tired of it, honestly. I tried to make up for it. I coordinated movie nights where we could watch them online together. I set up a dinner date one night. I cooked and she cooked, and then we had a set time of getting onto video chat and having a nice dinner. Things were deteriorating, and I was desperately trying to hang on to what we had. We took a break. I was angry and heartbroken. She went with a guy to prom. We kept talking, but it always ended in a fight, despite my best efforts. So we were going to church, and at some point that became a lucid experience for me as we started coming off the pain medicines and healing. I started listening and paying attention. I remember seeing one of the staff members, believe it or not, with a light instead of a face. I couldn't make out a single detail of her face. It was as if a huge bright spotlight was there instead. She had this infectious, overflowing joy, and I remember thinking, I want that. I just didn't quite know what that was yet. I continued to have bathtub altar conversations with God. Over time, that was my go-to whenever I was stressed, overwhelmed, fearful, devastated, really anything. I would talk to God, but I didn't know him yet. I remember specifically praying for God to mend my relationship with Jane. We could get through this, I just knew it. One Wednesday night in April 2012, I walked down with a friend and gave my life to Christ. Just a couple of months later, my whole family was baptized together on a Sunday morning. It is important to mention here that my coming to Christ was not also the moment that my attraction for women or my desires to repair my relationship with Jane ended. In fact, I prayed all the harder about our relationship. I sent a message to Jane the night I got saved. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to share the good news with her because she was my best friend and the person I hoped would eventually come back so that we could get to those future plans together. Who knew? Maybe one day we could go to church together. I know. That's not really how it works. Sure, some churches would have welcomed us, but they would have eventually told us the truth in love. This lifestyle was not from God. After a while, she did message me back. The next day, she agreed to FaceTime me, and very excitedly, I told her that I had gotten saved. Her reaction was not at all one that I expected. There was no joy, no excitement, no happiness, not even disappointment. She was mad. Looking back, I can see why. She had tried all that time to get me to walk away from being gay and find Jesus. Now I had found Jesus, but only after we were seriously involved. Maybe she thought that this was me cutting off any possibility of us as well, which at the time would have been incredibly wrong. I wanted nothing more than to share this with her, to share life with her, and for us to share a relationship that Jesus was a part of. She shut down a bit. Everything she said was short, angry, irritated. She quit looking at me on the camera and started walking around doing stuff. Not long after, she snapped something about not having time to stay on and that she had to go. I don't recall having any FaceTime calls with her after that. Very few emails received replies. Rarely, if ever, were messages returned on the app we used. I knew it was over, but I struggled to believe and accept it. We had been through so much together. I couldn't believe it was just over. I tried often. There were many emails sent reminding her of how I felt and of shared moments together, talking about the plans we both wanted so badly not too long ago. No response. I continued to pray for and about her. I prayed for us, our relationship, and that God would reconnect us and mend our relationship. Just before I was baptized, I prayed these prayers as usual, bent over on another Wednesday night at church, and I felt God say, I think it's time to let it go. My heart broke. I felt God telling me that I knew deep in the depths of my heart that I couldn't live for Him and continue living in this lifestyle, reminding me that it was something I had known all my life, reminding me that His word speaks against homosexuality. With a heavy heart and tears in my eyes, I remember slightly nodding in understanding and agreement. He gave me peace, but it didn't take away the broken heart. I began typing a long letter to Jane, expressing all of my feelings. How I still loved her. I didn't know if that would ever change, but that I wanted to live for God, and that I knew I needed to let her go. I figured by this point she had let me go, but this was more for my closure, I think. I wanted her to know where my heart was, but that I was choosing to let her go because I couldn't go on pretending that it was okay. It came down to what did I want more, a lifestyle of sin, choosing myself, or a relationship with Jesus and choosing Him. I told her that I was getting baptized and that I wanted to come up from that water truly free and truly new. I don't know exactly what was in the email because, again, this was like 12 years ago, but it was something to that effect. I sent that email to her the morning before we left for church to get baptized. I wished her the best, and when I came up out of the water that morning, I knew it was over. Really over. I started a long, hard process of asking God to change my desires. Struggling with still being attracted to girls, I remained respectful, especially as I went back to school for my senior year. Jane had graduated the previous year, and so my parents saw no harm in sending me back. Plus, we had all been saved and they knew that I wanted to live for Jesus, so I would make better decisions. They saw that change. I was in band, so inevitably there were times where I would be in a bathroom full of girls changing, and I would simply avert my eyes and try to leave as quickly as possible, out of respect for them, but also in an effort to keep temptation at bay. There were also questions from some because they knew me before I left the previous year. There were people that were curious as to what happened. As I prepared this episode, it occurred to me how bad this all probably looked on the outside. Gay girl who jokes about being on a slide to hell, cusses pretty avidly, and didn't know God comes out at school. Family finds out. Gay girl disappears literally off of everything and out of school, shows back up to withdraw, and is never heard from again until her miraculous return to school the next year. But she is straight, sold out to Jesus, joining and helping to lead First Priority, carrying a Bible around. People probably thought I joined a cult. Talk about whiplash. Anywho, as I was saying before, I didn't come to Jesus and immediately stop being attracted to girls and start being attracted to guys. In fact, while I slowly did start finding guys attractive, which is a big deal because I really never wanted to be with guys, I still found girls attractive. I was still pretty hung up on Jane despite my efforts to let go. It wasn't an easy release. I had a few stumbles along the way, and if those girls are listening, I'm sincerely sorry for the pain I caused as I tried to overcome that struggle. It wasn't until after I met my husband that I stopped finding women attractive. I'm going to say that again. It wasn't until after I met my husband that I stopped finding women attractive. I was surprised at how attracted I was to my husband when we first met, to be honest. This was new territory. The guys I had dated in the past were just me trying to fit in, convince myself I wasn't gay, convince others, or because it's just what girls did in middle and high school, right? This was different, though. Different and very new. He was so kind and respectful. I remember he would always give up his seat in our Sunday morning class and offer it. I didn't even take it half the time, but he would stand there with an arm over it just so that it was there if I did want it. He offered me a ride to one of the college group get-togethers because I wasn't going to be able to borrow the car to go. I didn't have my own car yet. I at first said no, then later sent him a message through Facebook and told him that if the offer still stood, I would take him up on it. This was our first unofficial date. We had one or two more not dates, if that makes sense, before we actually started dating. The rest is history. We got married. We had a baby about 2 years later. So here we are, present day. We belong to a church that I can't say enough good things about. I've been through ups and downs in my Christian walk. I've battled several other things, including my mental health along the way. But here we are. I know we took the long way around to get here, but I really wanted to be detailed in this telling of my testimony. I am miles away from that girl in high school. I wanted to be detailed because to some it might be hard to believe if you didn't know me then. I wanted to be detailed because I know all too well the way that the people in the LGBTQ+ community like to write things off. My first crush was in kindergarten, and the first guy that I truly fell in love with is the man I am now happily married to. I'm digging into God's Word regularly, helping to lead a Bible study, and running this podcast in obedience to God. The me now couldn't be more different from the me then. The Bible is very clear about homosexuality being wrong. I'm not just talking about Leviticus, so before you start with that argument, dig deeper. There are other verses in the Bible that are quite clear on the fact that homosexuality is wrong. The point of this, though, is that someone who didn't become gay because of outside influences, but just because the world is corrupt, still managed to be brought out of it, to find Jesus and let him start really changing me. Nothing is suppressed. The thought of being with men before actually nauseated me. And while it wasn't instantaneous, I did overcome those attractions by the grace of God. There have been times in my life, before those attractions were gone, that I was put in positions of having to sleep in the same room as other women, and I always chose to sleep on the floor. Despite an insistence that it was ridiculous and without an explanation as to why, time and again I chose to make sure that I was never put in a compromising position. If you are someone who is in that place in life, I would encourage you to do the same as well. Have accountability. Let others know when you are struggling. The joy you think you have now in that community is just a shadow. It is nothing compared to the joy you can find in Jesus. Thank you for listening to this very, very long episode. Most testimony episodes will probably be longer than the average episode, but I will be sure to mark them all as testimony episodes, just as I did this one. I believe at some point there will be other people giving their testimony here, and I can't wait for those as well. Thank you for listening. Please be sure to share this with others. If you have come here because you found one of my business cards, as I said before, be sure to pass that card along. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. I can't guarantee that I can answer them, but I will do my best to try. Remember to go forward with courage and boldness, knowing that God always goes before you so that you can go forth unafraid.